First off, I want to thank everybody for being here. My name is Carl Schultz, and I have the great privilege of being the provost here at UW-Madison. For those of you who don't instantly know what a provost is, which is everybody, I am the Chief Academic Officer of UW-Madison. And today I am incredibly honored to have the opportunity to welcome you to today's event. And I'm especially honored to welcome you, Representative Hsiao, as the first female to hold the role of Taiwan's representative to the US, as an outspoken advocate for gender equality, civil rights, democracy, and I'm going to add, a fellow cat lover. I and we are all deeply honored that you could join us here today at UW-Madison. Of course, UW-Madison has a long history and connection with Taiwan and its people and heritage. We have an active alumni chapter in Taipei, and our alumni have become leaders in Taiwan in the fields of academia, government, arts, and business. Some examples of the outstanding success of those such alumni include James Liao, a chemical and biological engineering alum who is president of Taiwan's prestigious Academica Sinica. Ho Mao Tse-yen, Taiwan's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Cheng Yan-gao, a founding chair of the Green Party of Taiwan. And one of my first students was a chief economist at Sinopac. And so we have these deep, deep connections. Meanwhile, our film program, Cinematique, houses celebrated Taiwanese films, including King Hu classics, such as Dragon Gate Inn and A Touch of Zen. These 35mm prints were donated by various film studios in Taiwan with the help of the Taiwanese government during former Chancellor Biddy Martin's 2011 trip to Taiwan, when she met with then Vice President Vincent Hsiao. On campus, our faculty also include a number of professors who are from Taiwan and were trained there, teaching today across campus in fields as diverse as the humanities, engineering, education, medicine, business, and more. In April, Professor Jinwen Yu, a faculty member of our dance department, presented a concert in Taipei, while National Taiwan University graduate Tom Tung is the co-director of our Polymer Engineering Center and group leader at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And of course, we have an active cohort of students from Taiwan here on campus. In addition to their curricular studies, these students are involved in many campus activities and organizations, including the Student Association of Taiwan, which is one of the hosts of today's lecture. The Student Association of Taiwan has over 80 active members with the mission to bring students together from all fields of study for recreational, academic, and cultural purposes. I get to now invite the SAT's student president, Roger Chang, up to the microphone. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the warm welcoming comment. And yeah, I am Roger Chang, and I'm currently a third-year pharmaceutical science PhD student, and I'm glad here to join this great event and to welcome our ambassador, Hsiao. And yeah, so again, it's my pleasure, and we have a prepared gift. It is our mascot, Rocky Badger. Yeah. So I hope our ambassador will like it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have a gift for you too. And I brought with me a face mask from Taiwan. Notably, a set of face masks of the cat warrior to share with our students here.
Yeah, so I think maybe we can, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure the schedule, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome again. I'm John Onesorg. I'm on the law faculty here, and I'm the director of the East Asian Legal Studies Center. And I'll just be very brief. I just want to welcome Representative Hsiao and thank a few of the co-hosts. There are many co-hosting partners today. East Asian Legal Studies, my center, the Center for East Asian Studies, the La Follette School of Public Affairs, the Tommy Thompson Center on Public Leadership, WISC Politics, the Wisconsin China Initiative, and the Student Association of Taiwan. It's been a group effort to bring this together, so thank everybody for doing it. And I just wanted to introduce a little bit more about Representative Hsiao's background. She's a graduate of Oberlin College, educated first in Taiwan, Oberlin College, Columbia University, Master's in Political Science, served 2 terms in Taiwan's legislature, so she's, she knows how to get things done in in a tough atmosphere. And since 2020 has been the head of TECRO, the Taiwan Economic Cultural Representative Office in Washington, D.C. So we're very, very pleased to have her here. And she will give her presentation, and then she said she'd be willing to take, if there's time, a couple questions from students. She'd really like to hear from students if students have a couple quick questions. So thanks very much, and I will turn it over to Representative Hsiao.
Sorry. Okay. Well, thank you, Director Onesorg, okay, and our provost, Carl Schultz, and everyone here, the organizations that have jointly hosted me here today for arranging this occasion to have a discussion with the students here and faculty of UW-Madison. It's wonderful to visit this very beautiful campus. It's also great to be back in the Midwest, and as I was introduced, I attended school in Ohio, but my campus was right in the middle of cornfields, and the scenery is nothing in comparison, but I'm glad to be here. Some people might wonder why I'm here to Madison, other than the badger, and thanks for the mascot gift, and the birthplace of the onion. Actually, since I assumed my post as representing Taiwan in Washington, D.C. last year, I've been eager to get outside of the Beltway. We are grateful that Taiwan enjoys overwhelming support among policymakers inside the Beltway, but we believe it's important to engage with the general American public and to gain a broader perspective on the important Taiwan-U.S. partnership. And so I've been quite eager to get out of the Beltway. The pandemic has disrupted a lot of my travel plans, but I'm honored that you have hosted this event today for me to have some face-to-face engagement. I must admit that since assuming my post in Washington, I've had numerous engagements with universities, but virtually. And this is only my second in-person engagement, and I'm, again, glad to be here. But mainly, well, of course, besides the badger and the onion, I'm here to share with you the story of Taiwan, which is a full-fledged democracy standing on the front line of defending our freedoms against an ever more aggressive, assertive, and authoritarian People's Republic of China. And I would like to give you a broader picture of what's going on in the region, in Taiwan. And I'll also share with you how we are working together with the United States and other like-minded democracies to resist the intensifying pressure that we're facing. Now, very often when you read about the news about Taiwan, it comes in the context of this. Look at this Financial Times headline: Taiwan to donate masks to Europe and the US, and this pledge to provide far more than China promised risks angering Beijing. very often when Taiwan shows up in the news, it's in the context of how or what we're doing that might anger Beijing, or what they are doing in response to a lot of the projects that we intend to carry out simply for our own survival. And in this case, Taiwan trying to be a force for good in the world by sharing our PPE supplies with other countries at a time of need. Also, for example, when a U.S. cabinet official visited Taiwan last year, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, to talk about healthcare cooperation and how we can further work together to fight the pandemic, the media also reported that this initiative prompted Beijing to send a squadron of fighter jets to the Taiwan Strait. So that's very often the context in which Taiwan is reported, which really ignores the point, which is Taiwan in itself is worthy of international recognition. Taiwan is a force for good. And headlines like this, some people might think this is just a satire from The Onion, but the reality is that there's very little understanding of the need for Taiwan to be engaged with the world and the force for good that Taiwan has already become. Another example is this past summer during the Tokyo Olympics, when the Taiwan team was introduced at the opening ceremony as Team Taiwan. All of the news reports were reporting on how that would also anger and offend Beijing. So we can see a pattern here. But what we want to say is we're a young but vibrant democracy. We've had 3 peaceful transitions of government already. The year that I decided to I'm not a good example in terms of the graduate students here because I dropped out of my studies at Columbia University to return to Taiwan in the year 1996, when we were having our very first ever presidential election. So we're a young democracy, but Taiwan, with the support of our people, with the hard-working efforts of our society, we have built one of the most open and diverse and liberal societies in East Asia. And so this is just one example from Freedom House that all indications show that Taiwan is one of the most free and open societies in the Asia-Pacific region. But some indicators of this, for example, a couple years ago, we passed the first legalized same-sex marriage bill in all of East Asia. And that was after years of debate. We had all of the controversies that any other country would have, but we have made important inroads in respecting diversity and also being an inclusive and open society. In addition to our progress in democracy, we have a very strong trade and economic relationship with the United States. Taiwan today plays a critical role in the global high-tech supply chain. If any of you think that trade doesn't have any direct impact on you, if anyone uses it, or who doesn't use a smartphone. If you use an Apple or Android system, it's most likely that your chip is made in Taiwan or designed by a Taiwanese company. And according to the latest statistics, in the year 2020, Taiwan was the 9th largest trading partner of the United States. And this, to put it into context, the volume of bilateral trade between Taiwan and the United States surpassed some of your traditional allies like France and Italy, and also more populated countries like India. The people of Taiwan cherish our free and open way of life, and of course, we feel we deserve to live in an international society free from China's anger issues. And we will continue to pursue closer economic and trade relations. Another part of our trade relationship that's actually very relevant to Wisconsin is the agricultural trade. Taiwan is the 8th largest consumer of American agricultural products. To put that into context, Taiwanese people consume more American beef than all of Southeast Asian countries combined. And if we put that in a per capita context, we are only second to Canada in terms of consumers of American agricultural products. And you can imagine, we are a small island. As much as we support our farmers like you do, we don't have enough land to be self-sufficient, and we are heavily dependent on trade in agriculture as well as in energy. Now let me turn to the security situation. We're not in any way suggesting that China's intimidations should be taken lightly. In the contrary, to protect our democratic way of life and the prosperity that's under threat, the reality is that we have been facing military intimidation, economic coercion, and diplomatic isolation for decades. But we also believe that the reason hostilities towards Taiwan exist is because the Chinese Communist Party has been telling the world that democracy is not compatible with Chinese culture. And unfortunately, that narrative has its followers in Asia as well. But Taiwan's very existence proves this narrative to be false. And over the years, Beijing has continued to dial up its belligerent activities, undermining the stability of the Taiwan Strait. This NASA picture might not be as clear, but this is the Taiwan Strait. This has become a very volatile area, with daily incursions of Chinese fighter jets and naval vessels circling around Taiwan. But in addition to the hard military threat, we are facing what we call gray zone areas of conflict. But before I turn to the next slide, let me just give you an idea about how the people of Taiwan are responding to this threat in this chart right here to the left. The evolution of events in Hong Kong, basically the deprivation of basic rights, has been quite alarming for the people of Taiwan. So instead of succumbing to such threats and intimidation, actually the number of people in Taiwan who have declared that they are willing to fight to prevent a Chinese takeover of Taiwan, actually the numbers have been going up in recent years. And I think Hong Kong and the events in Xinjiang, China, have had a tremendous impact of that. What do we mean by gray zone tactics? These are tactics that are aimed at sowing divisions in our society, destroying public confidence in our democratic system, and wearing down our will to defend. And these are threats against Taiwan that are short of a full-scale invasion or military action. And in recent years, Taiwan has involuntarily become a sort of testing ground for all types of social infiltration and influence operations. Through various social media platforms that are well known to all of you, even though they are banned in China, Beijing has been quite skillful at spreading its propaganda and fake news through these various platforms, often obscuring the line between fact and fiction. And researchers and watch groups in Taiwan have pointed out that Taiwan has become the top target for these disinformation campaigns, and they are constantly refining their maneuvers. For example, when there was a surge of COVID-19 cases in Taiwan in May this past year, Beijing spread false stories about our president being infected. Let me give you another example of their disinformation. When we were facing our surge in COVID-19 cases, many friends in Taiwan suddenly got this message in their private chat groups with a photo of a pet shop in America with a sign saying vaccines available today. The normal rational person would assume that those vaccines are reference to rabies vaccines since it's a pet shop. But the context of this disinformation in Taiwan was spread in saying that Americans have so many vaccines that they are giving them to their cats and dogs, and still they don't want to share their COVID vaccines with Taiwan. And people you would normally assume to be rational thinkers were heavily influenced. I was getting calls from my friends in Taiwan who were suggesting that they give me some money so I could go to Costco to pick up some vaccines for them, because a photo of Costco saying vaccines available was also spread around with the assumption that Costco was actually selling the vaccines. And this came in the context of disinformation, accusing my government of refusing to purchase vaccines while they were readily available to others on the international market. And I think you all know that that is completely false. But this information, again, is aimed at sowing discontent in society and also trying to wear down public confidence in our democracy and the effectiveness of dealing with crises. Another goal of such disinformation is to sow a wedge of distrust between Taiwan and the United States. In terms of our partnership with the United States in Washington, D.C., I've been working on 3 general categories, and that's the trade and economic partnership, the security partnership, and another category which I generally call democratic resilience and Taiwan's international participation. But let me first address the security side. I talked about the economic side already. Now, the traditional and non-traditional security threats posed against Taiwan today are more serious than ever. And as I said, Hong Kong has really impacted public perception in Taiwan about any commitments that the Chinese government offers as a formula, especially in regards to a so-called one country, two systems model of Hong Kong. And one critical factor in keeping the peace in the Indo-Pacific is the US security commitment to Taiwan. 42 years ago, when the United States decided to terminate diplomatic ties with Taiwan and establish recognition of the People's Republic of China, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act. Now, it's not very common that a relationship with a foreign country or government is governed by domestic United States law, but this is the unique situation of Taiwan. This bipartisan piece of legislation, in short also known as the TRA, has served as the legal basis for the United States to sustain close and substantive ties with Taiwan over the past 4 decades. The TRA also stipulates that any non-peaceful action to determine the future of Taiwan is a threat to regional peace and of grave concern to the US. Furthermore, it requires the US to support Taiwan in maintaining its own capability to deter any resort to force or other coercion that would endanger either Taiwan's security or its social and economic system. Every subsequent US administration, both Republican and Democrat, has carried out the security commitments stipulated in the TRA. And today, support for Taiwan remains broad and bipartisan. And I want to emphasize, though, that while we are talking about a defense commitment and support for Taiwan's security, Taiwan has no intention, nor are we able to engage in an arms race with the People's Republic of China. Our goal is to establish what we call asymmetrical capabilities to make any consideration of the actual use of force too painful, and therefore deterring an actual conflict. In addition to Taiwan's own investments in our asymmetrical capabilities, what's important is the international attention and awareness and support for the stability of the region. Since President Biden came into office, his top officials have publicly reaffirmed their rock-solid support for the Taiwan Relations Act and the long-standing security commitments to Taiwan. During an interview in April, Secretary of State Tony Blinken reiterated that the U.S. has a commitment to Taiwan under the TRA, and the Biden administration is committed to ensuring Taiwan has the ability to defend itself, and that it would be a serious mistake for anyone to try to change the existing status quo by force. We're also glad to see that in addition to the United States support and commitment, more countries are speaking out in a concerted manner about the security situation in the Taiwan Strait. And this has been a key development under the Biden administration. It has been made possible by active engagement between the United States and its allies and partners. Many countries have publicly underscored the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait through joint statements and actions. This was the case in high-level meetings between the United States and Japan, Korea, Australia, and similarly in the communiques and joint statements following multilateral meetings such as the G7 and the EU summit. And just over the last few days, the British Navy has also been conducting its own transit through the Taiwan Strait. We believe this is a concerted effort underscoring the global interest in maintaining stability and a free and open Indo-Pacific. Our fruits. Again, we are committed to defending our democracy. And as President Tsai has repeatedly pointed out, Taiwan's best defense is to make ourselves indispensable and irreplaceable. And this is why we aspire to be a force for good in the world. And even though Taiwan is excluded from most international organizations, we are a willing and capable partner to address global challenges, from combating climate change to tackling the spread of Ebola in Africa. We're always ready to work with the U.S. in providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief for those in need. And of course, we are committed to supporting our common values, such as women's empowerment, good governance, and equal rights. To conclude, I want to make a simple point, and that is we believe democracies need to work together. Recently, China banned the import of Taiwanese pineapples to the right, and then later on, our other fruits. And this was a gesture to try to coerce our farmers into succumbing to their political positions. They've done this not only to Taiwan against the WTO regulations, they've also been bullying Australia. When Australia demanded an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, China decided to cut its market from Australian wine and timber and other products. And when Lithuania, a Baltic country, announced its plans to set up a new trade office in Taiwan last month, China also tried to exert its political pressure by recalling its ambassador and threatening sanctions against Lithuania. We believe that other democracies shouldn't sit idly by. It may be difficult for a single country to deal with such economic coercion and political pressure, but if we come together in a collective way, I think there is a way to push back. And just to highlight the example of our pineapples that today we call freedom pineapples. When they were banned by China, the Japanese consumers stepped in. Consumers from other countries, from Australia, also stepped in to support our farmers in a way that was not even government initiated. It is by conscious, freedom-loving people around the world, consumers supporting each other. Let me give you another example. When Lithuania donated vaccines to Taiwan, and we are truly grateful for that too, like the United States, Japan, and some others who have supported Taiwan in our vaccine access. They donated vaccines. The Chinese demonstrated an anger tantrum, threatened sanctions, withdrew their ambassador, and Lithuania And the Taiwanese consumers responded by also supporting Lithuania. According to the credit card records, Lithuania has become one of the top 10 destinations for Taiwanese credit card consumer spending. You might wonder what we buy from Lithuania. I was wondering the same question, because within a short span of just a few months, Taiwanese consumers made $80 million worth of purchases from Lithuania. I was later told it might be chocolate and beer. But some of those credit card spendings also came in the form of humanitarian charity donations to various NGOs and organizations inside Lithuania. So this is about people helping each other, supporting each other, and freedom-loving people having each other's back. And I think that's important. What we also want to emphasize is that we hope we will continue to have the support of our friends in the United States for Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organizations. We believe the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that trying to put political boundaries around a country will actually make the world suffer. We need a global system that is much more inclusive and, of course, inclusive of Taiwan's contributions as well. Let me just stop there, but I am always open to questions, and I usually think I'm better at Q&A than I am at speech presentations. But I, again, appreciate this opportunity to engage with the many students here, and I want to conclude by sharing a little story about myself. As I said, I attended Oberlin College, and prior to that, I grew up in Taiwan during the days of martial law and a one-party authoritarian system. You might not know this, but 37 years of martial law makes the martial law in Taiwan to date one of the longest martial laws in the world. And under that system, freedom of speech, freedom of elections, they were all put on hold and banned. So when I went to Oberlin College intending to study math and chemistry, and I've forgotten all of that now, but it was in the small library, the East Asian Library, in this small liberal arts college campus in Midwest USA in the middle of cornfields that I came across books and magazines that had previously been banned in Taiwan. So in other words, growing up in Taiwan, we did not have access to this information without being threatened by imprisonment or without being sent to jail. The older generation kept on reminding us how dangerous politics are and that kids should just listen and not talk, not say anything. But when I came across these magazines, these books that provided a completely alternative view of our history, and I gained an appreciation of diversity and a critical perspective on where we were in the past and where we will be going, I kind of abandoned my plans in math and chemistry and decided to get politically active. And so I think my college years had a defining moment in my life. And I want to say that nearby Taiwan in Hong Kong, there are many young people your age who thought that they would be growing up in an environment that respects civil liberties. Unfortunately, many of these young people your age are fleeing for their lives. Many of them are already arrested and imprisoned. And Taiwan is not going down that path. We worked very hard to create the democracy that we have today, the basic freedoms, the open and diverse society, where we can decide what type of government we want through the power of the vote. And we're not going back. And we hope that you will all stand with us in terms of continuing an interest in the situation of East Asia and how, unfortunately, it is evolving in a very volatile environment. But I think if we all stick together, we will be stronger together as well. Thank you.
Representative Hsiao will take a few questions. Now there's a microphone in the back. She'd like questions from students, if preferably, and please identify yourself before you ask your question, and go to the mic so we can record it. Thanks.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation today, Madam Ambassador. My name is Stephen. I'm Taiwanese and a third-year law student here at UW. Seeing so many students here today, my question to you is, how can we as students help strengthen the U.S.-Taiwan relations?
How can students help strengthen the relationship? Well, I think there are a lot of things that can be done. You know, the basic is, you know, education and awareness of the situation. I think it's important that we're all connected globally. A lot of events that happen elsewhere will also have an impact. I think that awareness is important. But I also have a belief that grassroots diplomacy is important. And in my own experience, you know, like many of you, decided to get involved because I had the belief that everyone would have an impact on the world. And so social activism, promoting greater awareness, also writing letters to people of policy influence in Washington, whether through grassroots lobbying or engaging, that's also important. But I want to say that there's another area that we are encouraging, and that is the exchange of studies in, you know, here at UW-Madison, you have so many outstanding Taiwanese and Taiwanese American students. We want to encourage more American students to also travel abroad and study in Asia. That's a very important, I think, part of understanding the world, where you go beyond your textbooks and your lectures to really live among another people. We are establishing educational cooperation projects with various universities around the country, and we hope that when we get over the unfortunate COVID pandemic and all the travel restrictions that come with us, that we can welcome you to Taiwan. In the area of Mandarin education, this is something we feel Taiwan can offer in an environment that respects academic freedom and openness, just as you do here.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Avery Morrison. I'm a first-year master's student studying Japanese linguistics here. My question actually has to do with, Madam Ambassador, in your presentation you mentioned cognitive warfare, and we know in fact that many of these activities are state-sponsored by the People's Republic of China, and I was just wondering what you think the role is, or what the countermeasures are in place of Taiwan as a high-tech nation, sort of the counterintelligence measures, or even cybersecurity. What countermeasures are already in place, or what your government is planning to do to combat these attacks?
Thanks for the question. This is actually one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now. It's clear that a lot of these cyber attacks and influence operations are state-sponsored. One indication is our foreign ministry over the last year got 40 times more cyber attacks than they had the previous years. And the statistics show that the attacks usually come during working hours and skip the public holidays in China. So obviously they're coming from people who are working on the job. But it's a challenge, and as I shared with you, when our society is vulnerable, like when we're facing the pandemic challenge, you know, when people are desperate for vaccines, disinformation finds a breeding ground in our society. And so we are constantly coping with this. And there are a number of things that we've been doing. First, on the cybersecurity challenge, and that goes way beyond just public influence. It goes into the potential threat against critical infrastructure. I live in Washington, D.C. A few weeks ago, we had the suspension of the Colonial Pipeline as a result of cyber attacks. And my colleagues were going around saying, I can't get gas, so I can't come to work, I can't drive my car. It paralyzes your life, or at least the current lifestyle that people enjoy. But in addition to that, it's the social, the public political influence. There are a number of things. First of all, we need to highlight the role of our civil society and NGOs. When we try to correct a piece of disinformation, we must admit that government officials are not the number one trusted by our society. And very often when you have the involvement of civil society, organizing, fact-checking applications, and also rapid counter-information campaigns, that is usually more effective. We've also learned that given that, again, government officials are not the number one trusted. For example, during the pandemic, there was so much disinformation surrounding that. And so eventually our health ministry, in their various daily announcements, started to use not a spokesperson, but a spokesdog as the main face, encouraging people to wash their hands or to register for getting the vaccine or how to get the vaccine and all of that. Sometimes you need to fight rumor with humor, and that's what really gets around in a democratic society. And people will voluntarily share this information if they find it interesting, if they don't see it to be part of a government propaganda. But that's just one example of what we are doing in terms of countering that. But there are different levels of political influence. Disinformation is just one of them. Networking, like through social organizations, religious groups, economic coercion, as in the pineapples, threatening. And they're doing it not just to Taiwan. When South Korea, a few years ago, decided to deploy a theater missile defense system, the Chinese announced they would stop Chinese tourists as a means of coercion and punishment. So we need to be resilient. We need to diversify our economy so that we are not overly dependent on a single source of our economic prosperity. And again, that comes back to why we need to help each other as democracies, why we need to link ourselves with the Lithuanians, with the Australians, with others, so that tactics like this will cease to be effective.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Anatoly Datweiler. I'm not a student. I'm a professor of modern Chinese literature here, but I'm asking a question on behalf of a student who's emailed me and would like to ask how Taiwan, within the constraints of what is feasible, might work to counter the nationalist discourse and propaganda that's spreading within the Chinese mainland and then getting exported to other regions and is now posing a threat to the very fabric of a democratic, liberal, and open society. Thank you.
Thanks. That is another very important issue that we've been working on. There have been kind of two schools of thought in Taiwan. One is that, well, we should also establish a public TV station with a Chinese language narrative addressing Chinese people around the world, or Chinese-speaking people around the world. Of course, there is an assumption that there would be firewalls inside China, kind of blocking access. But we've tried this initiative. It's in its very early stages, but I think it's important that there are alternative Chinese language news sources around the world. But a second perspective on this is the strength and power of private citizens. And I think it's important that all of our Taiwanese students here or other Chinese people, Chinese-speaking people are more vocal about an alternative narrative. And by alternative narrative, I mean I'm referring to a narrative that supports pride in a culture, that supports international recognition for due accomplishments and achievements, but not in an aggressive way that limits the freedoms and suppresses the rights of other people.
Hi, dear ambassador. I'm a freshman. I'm a freshman student, and I'm studying political science. My question is, as students from Taiwan, Hong Kong, or some like Chinese descendants, how we can use the activism to sort of let a lot of Chinese students here to realize the existence of this information.
Well, you can be creative about engaging. One thing I did when I was a student was, really broaden my engagement with people, my classmates who came from China, with other classmates from other parts of the world as well. But I think these discussions are important. I do acknowledge, though, some challenges. And this is not something new to the modern Chinese government, because Taiwan also went through this during our painful martial law days. And that is some students, even though they are studying abroad in a free and open environment, they continue to feel pressure from their home state with the awareness that there might be some surveillance or other government monitoring of their speech. And the unfortunate phenomenon is that there have been some young Chinese students who study in the US, they go back or their family is threatened in some way or another. So I think we need to be sensitive to different pressures that people are under. But given that acknowledgement, I do think it's important to privately engage, and every citizen is a grassroots defender of democracy. So I think every student matters.
Hello, I'm a freshman undergraduate student as well. Now with a lot of activists in Hong Kong having been jailed or in exile, and many people already leaving Hong Kong to seek refuge in countries like the UK, what does Taiwan or other the Taiwanese government or Taiwanese organizations, what have they been doing to help Hong Kong? And not even just Hong Kong, other places like Xinjiang or Tibet.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are certainly very sympathetic to the situation of the young people in Hong Kong. We're also sympathetic to the people of Tibet and Xinjiang and other peoples that are facing significant political pressure. And as I said, my generation, we've been through part of that challenge within our own society. And so we cherish the freedoms, and that's why we feel obligated to be more supportive. We've done a number of things. We set up the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. I was one of the founding board members. And that provides a structure for supporting democracy movements elsewhere. Some of our political parties also engage with opposition parties in other countries. I used to chair an organization called the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats. Occasionally, a member party will win an election and go into government. But most of the time, it's an organization of exiles and opposition movements. But it's important that we share experiences, that we learn from each other. For example, 20 years ago, we shared our experience with an opposition of one of the Southeast Asian countries in our own experience trying to break through the control of freedom of the press. And that is in the early days of Taiwan's democratization. We had what we called underground radio stations, where the government would confiscate or close down a station, but they would carry the equipment mobily and quickly set up in another place. we actually exported some of that equipment to another opposition in another country. So I think there are many ways to engage. In terms of Hong Kong dissidents, a number of actually more young Hong Kong people from Hong Kong than ever have applied for school in Taiwan, and also, or if they are working, have chosen to apply for working visas, and also what we call an investment immigration, which is not a very high threshold for people with special skills and who wish to migrate to Taiwan. Many of them see Taiwan as kind of the transitional spot as they consider moving to the United States or other countries as well. Again, we are sympathetic. There are many NGOs working on this. The government has set up an office of point of contact to be supportive. But we must also acknowledge that the process is not easy. It's dangerous for some people. Some Hong Kong youth, for example, a few months ago attempted to escape Hong Kong on a boat. They were quickly blocked by the Coast Guard of the Chinese authorities, and I think they're in jail. And so while we want to be open in terms of supportive, we also want to be very effective, and sometimes being effective is trying to be supportive in a quiet way too. But I think there's certainly a lot that we can do together to be supportive.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello, Madam Ambassador. I'd first like to begin by thanking you so much for coming to speak here today. My name is Stephen. I'm a freshman undergraduate student, Taiwanese American. And my question has to do with Taiwan's diplomatic allies. So as of today, as of 2021, Taiwan has 15 diplomatic allies in countries that hold diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And I know that in the past 5 years since President Tsai Ing-wen has come into office, China has sort of practiced checkbook diplomacy with these countries in switching recognition from Taiwan to China, the People's Republic of China. And I know similarly through this pandemic, there has been many claims of vaccine diplomacy that have been practiced as well. So I was just wondering, are there any measures that Taiwan is taking to combat with this problem?
Well, this is an ongoing challenge, and for those of you not familiar, what we mean by diplomatic allies is countries in the world that have official diplomatic relations or recognition of Taiwan. And at the moment, there are 15 of these countries, mostly in Latin America and also Pacific Islands. The pandemic has been a difficult time for everyone. And during the time when the United States was not yet ready to export and donate vaccines to the rest of the world, countries were desperate for vaccines. It was a life and death situation. Unfortunately, the Chinese government took advantage of this vulnerable moment and went to governments that had relations with Taiwan and said, if you want our vaccines, you have to dump Taiwan. Countries were under pressure, just as we were when we were desperate for vaccines as well. We understand that. So what we had to do, I had to proactively work with our American friends to release more vaccines to the rest of the world, including to our friends and allies in the region. And this again highlights the need to help each other. Some of the other programs we are doing with these diplomatic allies in conjunction with the United States are projects like economic empowerment for women. We have a platform we call GCTF, the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, which is a bilateral platform we started with the United States, but now with the formal participation of Japan and also case-by-case participation from Australia, the UK, and others. But essentially, it's a platform to share best practices in many areas, whether it's in small, medium-sized businesses, entrepreneurship, women's rights, climate resilience, technology, combating disinformation. All of these have been issues that have been topics of cooperation through this platform. And I think they've also helped our diplomatic allies become more resilient and able to make their own decisions about who their friends are.
Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Hsiao. Thank you for your speech today. I'm a student from People's Republic of China. So here I would like to ask a question from China's perspective. So in your today's speech, you continuously blame China or Chinese government and accuse what China did unfairly towards Taiwan. So my question would be, if one day China get a chance of transforming into a democratic country, just like Taiwan did 30 years ago, would Taiwanese government or Taiwanese people willing to help? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's a, first of all, I would hope and wish that China can also transform into a democratic country where the Chinese people can enjoy the same freedoms that we enjoy in Taiwan and here in the United States. In terms of the future relationship between the two sides across the Taiwan Strait, our view is that it is a question that has to be, or any change of the status quo has to be agreed by the people of Taiwan. And so I think it's an open-ended question. It's a hypothetical situation, although subjectively, again, I wish and hope that China will also democratize. I think will, historically, over thousands of years, the territory of China has changed over different dynasties and in different contexts. And I think it's also a question for the Chinese people how their country will evolve. But again, the future relationship should be decided in a peaceful way and by the agreement of the people of Taiwan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ambassador Hsiao. I'm Jay Chow. I am a Taiwanese American. Has been in the States for almost 40 years. My question is, currently in the States, partisan politics as American, I feel is kind of pretty exhausting right now. As an ambassador from Taiwan, in such a political climate, how do you maneuver on the Hill and achieve your agenda? And if you can allow to share what are the success story that you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as a former politician myself, I'm not unfamiliar with partisan politics and fighting over political differences. In my own political career, I have been in office for 4 terms. I have run 6 elections and won 3 of them and lost 3 of them. So again, I'm familiar with partisan politics. But I think ultimately, in my current role, I don't get involved in Taiwan politics, nor do I get involved in partisan politics in the United States. My goal is to forge a bipartisan consensus on supporting Taiwan. And again, I'm fortunate that there is a growing agreement in Washington, D.C. over supporting Taiwan, and that agreement is bipartisan. Even my friends who are normally very partisan admit to me that Taiwan is one issue they can agree on across the political aisle. And we hope that this momentum will continue. And I'm pleased to say that yesterday in the Wisconsin state legislature, legislators, bipartisan, Republican and Democrat legislators also organized a Taiwan Friendship Caucus across partisan lines. And again, that is something that we hope to achieve. I think ultimately, despite political differences, and I often say this, it's okay to lose an election because that's the norm of democracy. But it's not okay to lose our freedom and our democracy. And so that is the same spirit that we operate in Taiwan and also here in Washington.
please join me once again in thanking Representative Hsiao. That was a